Chapter 41. Ran into them once at a ridotto, actually, acknowledges Mr. Lespark. Must have been that first year or two. John! Ages before we met, my treasure. But my nonpareil, you know how I resent and begrudge even the least allusion to any life of yours before we met. At this the Reverend blinks, and may be seen slightly to cringe, for he knows his sister. Thus depriving me, Lespark at least game, of all but, what's it been now, 10 years, 20? 15, my stout chestnut, as before me you had no life. 15 is your true age, putting you yet in the bloom of youth. Zab, the Reverend can't keep from inquiring, you regard your husband as some sort of sprout? She pretends to think about this for a while. Zabby, Mr. Lespark in a hurt tone. Would this ridotto, sir, have been at Lepton Castle by chance? The very oasis, Wicks. We'd done some business out that way, I and his lordship. I had a standing invitation from them to pop in whenever I wished. Didn't know I'd married quality, did you? Elizabeth chirps. 'Twas a part of the expedition I missed, Zab, and as the surveyors were on about it for weeks after, was often to be reminded of. The infamous Lepton ridotto. In those days, out past the reach of civic lanthorns, as of nail-hung lamps in sheds and tallow dips, and the last feeble rushlight, beyond in the forest, where the supernatural was less a matter of public room trickery or amusement, Mr. Lespark, as he tells it, was used to visit with potential customers, as well as tour his sources of supply, gunsmithies, forges, bloomeries and barrel mills, passing as in a glide through the country, safe inside a belief as unquestioning as in any form of pietism you could find out there, that he, yes, little J.W.L., goeth likewise under the protection of a superior power. Not, in this case, God, but rather business. What turn of earthly history, however perverse, would dare interfere with the workings of the invisible hand? Even the savages were its creatures, a merchant's pipe reverie, and if considered as a class of purchasers at retail, well, more admirable even than Dutch housewives in the single-minded joy with which they browsed and chose. In his first trips out he engaged local guides, who kept to the shadows and did not speak, to show him the way to the well-guarded, and in the estimate of some, iniquitous, iron plantation of Lord and Lady Lepton. Each time 'twas like stepping across out of the difficult world and into that timeless encyclopedia light, where apprentices kept a monastic silence, entirely dedicated to the tasks at hand, did not fall asleep in mid-afternoon, nor moon about in states of erection for hours at a time. All noxious smokes and gases were being vented someplace distant, invisible. The dogs loafed, well-fed, in alleyways. Iron in 100 shapes was being produced, exactly to plan. The women chattered as they worked in a small studio of their own, casting from small crucibles specially formulated batches of steel. Sunlight flooded through opened windows, the faces of the workers remaining attentive, uninflected, eyes only upon the work. This, Le Spark must remind himself, each time he rounded one particular unfolding of the trail. Hazel branches parting, river noise suddenly in the air, dogs en route and at the gallop. This was how the world might be. To see with nothing but this simplicity, to take only these unpolluted breaths, to leave the shop after the last of the light, with a face as willingly free of affliction as that presented at dawn. 'Twas a moment hard come by out here of viewing things whole, and he grew with each visit more and more to depend on it. It is something he cannot explain to many people. He knows that few distinguish between the metal itself and the forms it happens to end up in, the uses it is widely known for being put to against living bodies, cutting, chaining, penetrating sort of activities. A considerable sector of the iron market, indeed, directed to offences against human and, of course, animal flesh. All too true, he can imagine himself saying, yet once you have felt the invisible grasp of the magnetic, or gazed unto transport as the gang falls away before the veined and billowing molten light. Oh, the blinding purity! Oh, Mr. Le Spark, being the likely reply. What is not visible in his rendering, journalizes the Reverend to himself later, is the Negro slavery that goes on making such no doubt exquisite moments possible. The inhuman ill usage, the careless abundance of pain inflicted, the unpriced coercion necessary to yearly profits beyond the projectings of even proud Satan. In the shadows where the forge's glow does not reach, or out uncomforted beneath the vaporous daylight of Chesapeake, bent to the day's loads of fuel from the vanishing hardwood groves nearby, or breathing in the mephitic vapours of the bloomeries. Wordlessly, and, as some may believe, patiently, they bide everywhere, these undeclared secular terms in the equations of proprietary happiness. Mason and Dixon, happening to be lost at nightfall as they will later tell it. In the last possible light, come upon a cabin, hardly more than a shed, of weathered, fragrant old wood, beneath a sagging roof, showing no lights, to apparition, abandoned for years. Yet its ancient door-sill once traversed, the surveyors find more room inside than could possibly be contained in the sorrowing ruin they believed they were entering. To their alarm, light shines everywhere, chandelier light, silver sconce and sperm taper light, striking them both to an all but sympathetic squint. The plafond, as their slowly unclenching eyes ascend in wonder, runs to a full spectrum of colours, depicting not the winged beings of heaven, but rather the denizens of hell, and quite busy at their pleasures too. Yes, very interesting indeed, Dixon hastily. Yet if it's all the same to thee, I think, having grasped the point, I, for one, am now arrived at the moment of and thee? There's no moon, Mason reminds him. Going out there now would be as dangerous as jumping into the open sea. We must shelter here. We've no choice. 'Tis only then that they hear the music. Though once acknowledged, it seems to have been playing all the time. Indeed, it now emerges that they have entered something long in progress, existing without them, not for their benefit, nor even their attention. Some 20 or 30 musicians, by the sound of it, new music, advanced music, as far from the oboic reveries of the Bezozis as the imperial melismata of Quantz. Its modalities rather suggesting some part of the globe distant from Britain, a dangerous jangling that nonetheless acts as an hypnotic draft upon the surveyors. Cautiously, drawn, following a gradient of loudness as best they can, they pass through doorways, across anterooms filled with expensive surfaces and knick-knack intricacies they are moving among too briskly to examine, beginning to pick up the murmur of a gathering, peaks of falsetto insincerity. Suddenly a grand archway, above which, carved in glowing pink marble, naked men, women, and animals writhe together in a single knotted curve of lustfulness. The surveyors have been gazing at it for somewhat longer than is considered sophisticated, when a voice from some place they cannot see announces them. Mr. Mason and Mr. Dixon, astronomers of London. Mason snorts. Congratulations. Dixon pretends to look about for the voice. Really, I'm only a county surveyor. He's the astronomer. Overdoing the rusticisms, Mason mutters, and do try not to fling your head about so. Thus do they come stumbling into what, in London, is termed an hurricano, a thick humidity of intrigue and masks realized in locally obtained fur and plumage, clamorous with chatter and what seems now more to resemble dancing music, dominated from one wall by a gigantic rococo mirror, British Chippendale to the innocent eye, engrossing easily the 100th part of an acre. Dixon trying to stand his ground even as his partner has begun to walk away rapidly backward, for an eye blink there having passed over his face a look of alarm that has not possessed it since the seahorse during the worst of that encounter. I cannot explain, as Dixon overtakes him. 'Tis a sort of moral panic. Manners first. We must go in, as we can't offend our hostess. There's sure to be a hostess. Dixon frantically resorting to what he knows of climbers' discourse. If we offend her, she will at best behave inconveniently to her husband. But slightly worse, she will advise him to have us expelled from the province. Are you there? Sheriffs will be instructed to make our lives even more difficult. Children will play rude hoaxes upon us. Watermen will contrive to put us in the water. My wig! Mason grasping and shifting it frantically about. It doesn't feel quite symmetric. No, and the coat. The moment we arose I said it, remember? Shouldn't I wear the blue brocade? But in that case I should have had to change the breeches. Sir, a calm voice at his elbow suggests, take hold of yourself, lest another be obliged to. Aye, another what? Irascible Mason, known up and down the churs of Stroud on occasions like this as a lightning shin-kicker, has actually begun shuffling to seek some purchase upon the gleaming floor when he belatedly recognizes the notorious Calvert agent Captain Dasp, to smoke whose dangerousness even those in an idiocy far more advanced than Mason's require but an anxious few seconds. Gentlemen, advises this ominous shadow, you have fallen willy-nilly among a race who not only devour astronomers as a matter of habitual diet, but may also make of them vile miniature sandwiches, and lay them upon a mahogany sideboard whose price they never knew, and then forget to eat them. Your only hope in this room is to impersonate so perfectly what they assume you to be that instincts of predation will be overcome by those of boredom. I was just about to tell him that, nods Dixon. Lady Lepton has appeared. The hostess there is sure to be one of. Captain, how pleasant, with a gaze met calmly by that of the agent that invites, at least, conjecture. Dixon, ignoring the captain's sensible advice, is giving her the once-over. Eh, why, lady, I've seen thee years ago at Raby Castle, where thou came to visit. We were both about the same age, still children. It was nearly winter. Thee in a riding habit, a sort of Brunswick style, scarlet and blue and gold buttons, which is about where the captain throws up his hands and walks off shaking his head. A full skirt, a petticoat and beautiful small boots of wine-coloured cordovan, with French court heels, aye, and a cocked hat with green parrot feathers, all against a winter sky, and thine hair, left loose, falling nearly to the saddle. Ordinarily, their hostess would have been expected to rejoin, and you were the muddy boy at the side of the ditch with his hand upon his willy, and everyone would have laughed gaily, except, of course, Dixon. Instead, she peers directly in his eyes and whispers slowly, "Aye, you. At first I thought you were one of the castle's ghosts, following me, keeping just out of the light. Even when I didn't see you, I felt you. They told me you were wild, poor, a dissenter, an outlaw, to pay you no attention. But I must have disobeyed if, after all these years, I still remember you." Whereupon a golden edge of pleasure proceeds to bisect him upwardly all the way from his buttocks to his heart, which these days is a lengthy journey. Tonight's slave orchestra includes the best musicians the colonies, British or otherwise, have to offer. For the melody-maddened iron nabob has searched them out. A harpsichord virtuoso from New Orleans, a New York viol master, pipers direct from the forests of Africa, and bought up their contracts as others might buy objects of art. The string instruments are from workshops in Cremona, the winds from France, and the music they are playing here for the guests at Castle Lepton, though at the moment little more than a suite of airs of the street and day, is nonetheless able somehow, perhaps in the unashamed prevalence of British modality, that is, Phrygioid, if not Phrygian, to lend weight to, where it does not, in fact, ennoble, even the most brainless conversation upon the great floor, which can usually be heard in his lordship's vicinity, though nowhere at the moment near Dixon, who is finding all this, to his delight, dangerously interesting. When they were still that young, he had thought her bold as a boy, and proud, with what he had already remarked at a distance as the proudness of women. He stayed out, away from others, on a lurk among the towers and gateways, and in the shadows of autumn, late-coloured evenings and the mornings, had grown enjoyably obsessed. His great-uncle George, believing her a witch, cast at young Jeremiah looks of sorrow and reproach. But the boy had watched her out on the fell, riding so fast that her amazing hair blew straight back behind her, the same wind pressing her eyelids shut and her lashes into a fan, and forcing her lips apart, long on a personal basis with the horses the Earl had given her to ride. Dixon sought their company now in the stables at night, stroking, feeding, talking it over gently with them. Indoors one day of early sleet, lurking in the damp and rodent smell of the mural passages, he looked out through the pierced paint eyes of Nevilles and Vanes, costumed as shepherds, before a castle glorified with an afternoon light that never was, to see her kissing one of the chambermaids, who stood as under a spell, whilst ice sought entry, lashing at the tall windows. At nightfall he heard her in the corridors far away, singing something in Italian, Bellezza cerchiama, the sweet notes picking up from the stone passages, a barking echo. Somehow this fearlessly independent girl had then gone on to marry the ill-famed, the drooling and sneering, multiply bepoxed Lord Lepton, an insatiate gamester who failed to pay his losses, forever a-twittering, even as he tumbled to ruin in one of the period's more extravagant stock bubbles, summarily ejected from clubs high and low, advised by friend and enemy that his only decent course would be to step off the edge of the world, thinking they meant go to America. Resolutely chirpy, he donned his sturdiest coat and breeches, took a false name and a public conveyance to the docks, there indentured himself to a north-riding ironmaster, and in good time sailed away, being kept with the other slaves for the duration of the crossing well below the ship's waterline, to far and fever-clouded Chesapeake, where he was brought up country, to dig and blast in the earth, fetch and stoke in the service of the perpetual fires, smell unriddably of sulphur, drive the African slaves as basely as a creature of his sort might be expected to do, be one day trusted with blasting powder, an event that, given the state of his soul, counted as a major leap of redemption, and after 3 of these Stygian years become journeyman, and in 2 more, by then his own master, make his next fortune, returning to England but once more, not to the mansions that had spurned him, but to dark-skied Durham, to carry back to America the woman who, mysteriously having allowed it to happen, stands here now, chatelaine of Lepton Castle, almost as Dixon might remember her upon one of the old battered towers of Raby, pretending yet, surveying below the intricate deployment, not of fancied men and horses of long ago, but of present tense Brussels lace and mignonette, of brocades and flowered gauzes and unkempt rainbows of satin across her ladyship's parquetry, as the music complains inconsolably of love's at worst hard labour, at best impossible. Raving lunatic, of course, his lordship, fixing the astronomers with a gleaming stare. What? Oh, aye, Dixon enthusiastically nodding, whilst trying to kick Mason under cover of her ladyship's gown, whose elaborate hem had somehow crept closer to his person than he imagined etiquette to allow. Imbecile, Mason, he thinks amiably, suggests. Lord Lepton reacts as though knifed. Exactly the word he used. Or was it idiot? You, Dasp, you were there. Which was it? If memory serves, my lord, 'twas my lord that called him both of those. He pronounces each word separately in a way that strikes the listener as unarguably foreign, though what strange tongue may lie back of his English must remain a mystery. He is gazing at Mason and Dixon too, so as to leave no doubt that this will be the last uncompensated favour. Henceforth the astronomers, unless the price be agreeable, are on their own. Though, I say, look here, Lord Lepton has meantime been rattling. Everyone on about it. Great chain of being this, great chain of being that. Well, frankly, I'm the first to say jolly good, but now you see, you have this rather lengthy chain, don't you? And, well, damn, what's it for, eh? What's it to do? Is there something, for example, hanging, dangling from its bottom end? Well, what happens if that something fails to hold on? Obviously it falls, but where, don't you know? And how far? Perhaps, Captain Dasp sibilantly entering the game. It is not a straight vertical line at all. Perhaps it is a helix. Gesturing in the air for Lord L's benefit, and wound about something, keeping it, let us say, chained in. Something not part of the great chain itself, but fully as enormous. Something that must be kept in restraint, which we pray may be only sleeping when, throughout the chain's vast length, it is felt, now and then, to stir. Yes, cries his lordship with a strange shiver, flexing, writhing, perhaps beginning to snarl a bit, as one might suppose, deep within its breast. Well, 'tis a horizontal chain for me, Dixon beamingly raising his punch cup in Lord L's direction, drawing from his partner a quick turn of the head. Why do you assist in this idiot's folly? Such as surveyors use. Which shall go before, I wonder, and which follow? Aye, and which direction shall it point in? A newcomer might have imagined he was talking about the line, and that the answer was west, but the nabob was feeling personally assaulted. You sound like one of these leveller chaps, he mutters. Dixon has about decided to reply, circumferenter, actually, when Lady Lepton interposes, sighing, Ah, yet do recollect that chain, more imprisoning than the captain's, more relentlessly fiduciary than Mr. Dixon's, her gaze fixing each as she speaks his name, then meaningfully Lord Lepton, but to no avail, the object of her insinuation only continuing to nitter-natter, with a strange pointedness toward Dixon. There's coal out where you're going, you see. Already a brisk trade by way of the Indians, though they can't bring it in volume. Poor chaps. Pretty, magical black stone for all they know of it. Yet we're not all charcoal hearths here. We've coke as well. Produce your own, chambers and all here upon the plantation. Life for her in these forests has never proved altogether exhilarating. Her face, even with its complexion still pale as a summer moon just risen above the staithes, having with the years formed itself into an aspect of permanent disappointment. Thus, although like her husband she may laugh at anything, yet is the pitch of her voice as low, and its very inflection as bitterly preconsidered, as those of my lord are high and carelessly unrestrained. Sounding together, the two make a curious sort of duetto. 'Twas alleged by wits of the day that she had married him for his membership in that infamous Medmenham circle known as the Hellfire Club, resting thereby assured at least of a lively bedchamber. But as evidence that my lord's tastes run to nothing much out of the ordinary, the eye alert to the stirrings of a gown, and adept at translating these into the true movements beneath the expensive surface and intervening petticoats, may detect a rhythm, a damask pulse that speaks of desires to cross into the forbidden. It is difficult in these days of closer fitting attire to imagine the enormous volumes of unoccupied space that once lay between a skirt's outer envelope and the woman's body far within. Why, there may be anything, Captain gasped as if genuinely alarmed, stashed in there, contraband tea, the fruits of espionage, the coded fates of nations, a moderate-sized lover, a bomb. Yet the present-day bodice, remarks Lady Lepton, can conceal secrets only with difficulty. A single key, perhaps, or the briefest of love notes. Indeed, 'tis but an ephemeral surface, rising out of the spaces that billow ambiguously below the waist, till above melting, here into bare décolletage, producing an effect, do you mark, of someone trying to ascend into her natural, undraped state, out of a chrysalis spun of the same invisible silk as the social web, kept from emerging into her true winged self, perhaps then to fly away by the gravity of her gown. "Oh, pish-tush," comments her husband. "Pshaw! Bodices are for ripping, and there is an end upon it." The servants in the hall tonight are whitely wigged black slaves in livery of a certain grade of satin and refinement of lace. Black majordomos and black soubrettes. One of the latter now passes by with a tray of drinks. "My lord's own punch receipt," advises the pretty bond maiden, gazing at Dixon intently. "Knock you on your white ass." "Why, I would have brought my black one, but no one told me." She seems to know him. For a frightening moment, he seems to know her. "Yes, lovely, isn't she? Purchased her my last time through Quebec, of the Widows of Christ, a convent quite well known in certain circles, devoted altogether to the world, helping its novices descend into ever more exact forms of carnal mortality, through training as, how to call them, not ordinary whores, although as whores they must be quite gifted, but as eager practitioners of all sins. Lust is but one of their sacraments. So are murder and gluttony. Indeed, these two are combined most loathsomely in their ritual of Holy Communion. Rest thou content with the way he's talking, Dixon whispers loudly into Mason's ear, and moistly as well. "An otic catarrh was not in my day's plans, Dixon." "Oh, why, Bonnie, see if I confide anything to thee any more." "Pray, continue, sir. 'Tis but his idiocy again. Recurs like an ague, harmless really, and," Mason believes he must ask, "do they get fat?" "Fat? Ah," Captain Dasp assures him. "Violent, greedy, treacherous. Needless to say, men without number fall in love with them, pay them repeatedly enormous sums, becoming ruined in the process, whilst las vidas de Cristo continue to bloom and prosper." In the instant, Mason later avowed he knew that the captain was a French spy. The Peace of Paris has left a number of these adrift, the reduction of Canada having forced many of them south and west to the Illinois and beyond. There are sightings of Pepe Descubite and 2A Lagoux, Iron Mask Mathioli, and the boys from Presque Isle too. Few but the foolhardy, however admirably so, have stayed in Pennsylvania, and those ever within galloping distance of Maryland, with its web of Catholic houses of asylum. Not that anyone there looks forward to being asked, "What, that bloody frog again?" Chauncey, not in front of the CHILD. "Oh, Mama, is that funny talking man coming to visit again?" "Yes, but not a word, or God will nail you where you stand, and probably with your mouth open just like that." "We promise, and shall he cook for us again?" Upon such frail expectations, fugitive as the smell of a roast through an open window, do the lives of these renegados often depend. Somewhere beyond the curve of a great staircase, gongs, each tuned to a different pitch, are being bashed. "At last," mumble several of the guests as they make speed toward yet another wing of Castle Lepton, converging at the entrance to a great domed room, the roof being a single stupendously sized hemisphere of glass, taken from a bubble blown first to the size of a barn by an ingenious air pump of Jesuit invention, then carefully let cool and sawed in half. The sister hemisphere is somewhere out in America, though where exactly, neither lord nor lady is eager to say, as no one at the moment has anything but gaming of one sort or another in mind. The topic is soon let go of. Here is a paradise of chance, an EO wheel big as a roundabout, lottery balls in cages ever a-spin, billiards and baccarat, bésique, and games whose knaves and queens live, over Flemish carpets, among perfect imported Chippendale gaming tables, beneath the chandeliers secretly, cunningly faceted so as to amplify the candlelight within. They might be children playing in miniature at men of enterprise, whose table is the wide world, land and seas, and the sums they wager too often, when the gaming has halted at last, to be reckoned in tears. End of chapter.